Zara stumbled into the small, dimly lit apartment on Earth, her breath shallow and quick. Her vibrant purple skin, usually glowing with the grace of her alien race, was now pale, as if the energy had been drained from her. Every step she took was a struggle, her body aching from the intense injuries she had sustained. But the worst of her pain wasn't just physical, it was the crushing weight of failure that hung over her. She had come to Earth on a diplomatic mission, an attempt to broker peace between warring alien factions, but things had gone horribly wrong. Now, stranded and wounded, Zara had nowhere else to go. The apartment she had found herself in wasn't much, but it was safe for now. It smelled of Earth's food, something Jason, her human roommate, had clearly been cooking. Zara was supposed to be negotiating a delicate peace between her alien race and the humans, but instead, she had landed on this strange planet with only a handful of allies, none of whom knew what had happened. Zara couldn't afford to trust anyone, especially not a human. The idea of relying on a human, someone she saw as weak, was almost laughable. But here she was, and she had no other choice. She needed to heal, and this human would have to help her. Jason was a tall, awkward man with dark brown hair and a face that hadn't yet learned to hide the confusion and curiosity he often felt in the presence of alien species. His apartment was a chaotic blend of modern technology and old earthbound comforts. Zara had seen humans use both high-tech gadgets and primitive tools in her brief time on Earth, but the combination in Jason's apartment was unlike anything she had encountered. The scent of cooked food lingered in the air, a strange comfort amidst the pain that twisted through her body. She leaned against the doorframe for support, trying to steady her breathing, but the pain only worsened. It felt like something inside her was tearing, as if her own body was rejecting her mission, her failure. Just as she thought she might collapse right there, Jason walked out of the small kitchen. His eyes went wide when he saw her standing in the doorway, looking pale and on the brink of collapse. "Zara, what happened?" Jason rushed to her side, his eyes scanning her body, as if trying to figure out how to help. His face flushed, clearly shocked by her appearance. Zara, despite her pain, couldn't help but notice how his gaze lingered on her. It wasn't just concern. There was something else there, something she had seen many times before, but never from a human. "I'm fine," she said sharply, trying to hide the weakness in her voice. But the lie was thin and fragile. She winced as another wave of pain coursed through her. Jason didn't buy it for a second. He gently but firmly guided her to the small couch in the living room. "No, you're not fine. You're hurt. Let me help you." Zara hesitated. She had spent her entire life training to be strong, to never show weakness, to never rely on others. But here she was, desperate for help from the very species she had been taught to consider inferior. She didn't trust humans. She couldn't. And yet Jason's sincerity reached her in a way that was hard to ignore. "I said I'm fine," she repeated, her voice more strained than before. Her body was betraying her, and her mind was racing, trying to find a way out of this situation. Jason didn't listen to her protests. He pressed a small, cold device to her wrist, scanning her vitals. "You're burning up," he said softly, his eyes narrowing in concern. "You need medical help, Zara. And I don't think you're in any condition to argue right now." Zara's vision blurred slightly, the room spinning as the reality of her situation hit her like a crashing wave. The human, Jason, was right. She was in no condition to argue. Her body was failing, and she needed help. But the worst part was the overwhelming feeling of helplessness that washed over her. She was a warrior, a soldier, and yet here she was, vulnerable, unable to even stand on her own. "I need to fix the device," Zara murmured, trying to steady herself. Her alien communicator, the device that had malfunctioned during her mission, was the source of much of her pain. It was failing, and if she didn't fix it soon, it could cause a disaster, not just for her, but for the entire planet. But the more she tried to focus, the more her vision swam, and the less coherent her thoughts became. "Jason, seemingly sensing her distress, sat beside her on the couch. "What device? What's happening?" His voice was filled with worry, but Zara couldn't bring herself to explain. She was too weak, too embarrassed by her own failure. "Leave it," she said, voice cracking slightly. "It's not your problem." But Jason wasn't having it. He grabbed her hand gently, his fingers warm against her cool skin. "No, it is my problem now. You're hurt, and I'm not just going to sit by and let you suffer." Zara wanted to pull away, to tell him to leave her alone, but for some reason she didn't. There was something in his voice, a determination, a caring, that made her stay still. She had always kept others at arm's length, always pushed them away. But here, in this moment, in this strange place, something in her wanted to give in, to allow herself to be cared for. It was a weakness, she told herself, but it felt good in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. And that scared her more than anything. Jason stood up, looking down at her with a mix of frustration and concern. "You need rest. I'll figure this out. Just stay here." Zara nodded, though she wasn't sure she could stay awake much longer. As Jason moved to get something from the kitchen, she let her eyes close, but the questions kept swirling in her mind. Who could she trust? Was this human just another obstacle in her path, or could he be the one who could save her? The thought gnawed at her, and she had no answers. But one thing was certain. Her world was about to change forever. Zara lay on the couch, her body aching, her mind a haze of confusion. Her alien physiology was fragile in ways she had never expected. Even though her species was known for their strength and resilience, the injuries she had sustained from the failed mission were too much to bear. Her head throbbed, and her chest tightened with each breath. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, and it wasn't just physical. It was as if her entire being was failing her, rejecting her very existence. She clenched her fists in frustration, but that only made her injuries worse. Jason had left the room to get some supplies, but Zara could still feel his presence lingering in the air. There was something about him that made her feel strange. She had come to Earth with a mission, a purpose. To her, humans were weak and primitive. But now, as she lay helpless on this human's couch, she found herself questioning everything she had been taught. She had been trained to be independent, to never rely on anyone, especially not a human. And yet here she was, depending on Jason for help, feeling vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to before. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp pain in her side. She gasped and clutched at her chest, her vision blurring as another wave of agony washed over her. It felt like something was inside her, pushing against her, tearing her apart. The device she had been carrying, the one that was supposed to help her complete her mission, was malfunctioning. It was linked to her body, and every time it sent out an unstable pulse, it caused her more and more pain. She needed to fix it, but her hands were shaking too much to even think straight. Jason returned to the room, carrying a small medical kit and a glass of water. His eyes softened when he saw her struggling, and for a moment, Zara wished she could push him away. But she couldn't. The pain was unbearable. She felt as though every part of her body was on fire, and all she wanted was for it to stop. "Zara, you're burning up. I can't just sit here and watch you suffer," Jason said, kneeling beside her. His voice was filled with concern, but Zara could hear the hesitation in it. He didn't know what was wrong with her, but he was determined to help, even though she had made it clear that she didn't want his help. "I told you, I'm fine," she said, her voice weak. She wanted to push him away, tell him to leave her alone, but the words didn't come out the way she intended. Instead, they sounded more like a plea for help than a command. It frustrated her. She hated this feeling, being weak, being vulnerable, but she couldn't fight it. Jason carefully set the medical kit down on the table and looked at her with a mix of determination and concern. "You're not fine. You're in pain, and I can't just let you lie there. You need help." Zara turned her head away, trying to hide the tears that were welling up in her eyes. She had never allowed anyone to see her weakness, never let anyone get close enough to witness her pain. But Jason wasn't like the others. He wasn't afraid of her, or at least he didn't act like he was. He was just trying to help. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it was clear to both of them that she was lying. Jason could see it in her eyes. She was fighting to stay conscious, but the pain was too much for her to bear. She could feel herself slipping away, her vision growing darker with each passing moment. "Zara, listen to me," Jason said softly, taking her hand in his. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to do this by yourself. Let me help you." Zara's heart skipped a beat as his hand gently squeezed hers. It wasn't just the physical touch that caught her off guard. It was the sincerity in his voice, the genuine care he had for her. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, pushing people away, convincing herself that she didn't need anyone. But in this moment, as Jason held her hand and looked at her with such kindness, those walls began to crumble. "I'm not like the others," Jason continued, his voice steady. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're okay." Zara closed her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. She didn't want to be vulnerable, didn't want to admit that she needed help. But the reality was undeniable. She was dying. The device was killing her, and without it, she had no way to defend herself against the forces coming for her. "I can't fix it," Zara whispered, her voice breaking. "The device, it's broken. I don't know how to stop it." Jason's grip on her hand tightened, and she could feel his warmth, his strength. "We'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this. I'll help you, no matter what." For the first time in what felt like forever, Zara allowed herself to let go. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling Jason's presence like a lifeline pulling her from the edge of despair. She didn't know how to fix the device, and she didn't know what would happen next. But in this moment, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't alone. Jason had proven that. Despite the pain, despite the fear, Zara allowed herself to trust him. And in doing so, she found something she hadn't expected to find on Earth: hope. Jason stood up, his expression resolute. "We're going to get through this. I'm not leaving your side." Zara wanted to argue, to tell him that he had no idea what he was getting into, but the words died in her throat. She knew that Jason was right. She didn't have to face this alone. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zara felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her to survive. With Jason by her side, there was hope. And that was something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for a long time. Zara's body still ached from the damage, but the pain was different now. It was more manageable, though the strange feeling of vulnerability lingered in her chest. Jason hadn't left her side, staying close in ways she couldn't quite understand. His presence was comforting, yet there was a weight to it, a tension that grew with each passing moment. The days following the incident felt like a blur. They had stayed inside, keeping a low profile. Zara didn't trust the outside world anymore. She had been an alien on Earth, sent for a mission that now felt meaningless. Her mission was lost, her body broken, and the one human she had always viewed with disdain was now the only person keeping her alive. It was a hard pill to swallow. As Zara sat up, her gaze caught Jason as he moved around the room, gathering various tools and supplies. There was something about the way he moved, with purpose and determination. He wasn't a soldier like she had been, but in this moment, he felt like one. A sense of duty radiated from him, a protective instinct that was both foreign and strangely comforting to her. "Jason," she called out, her voice hoarse. He looked up from his work, his brow furrowed in concern. "Yeah, Zara. What's wrong?" "I don't know how long I can keep pretending I'm okay," she said softly, her gaze falling to the floor. The words felt heavier than she expected. She had always prided herself on being strong, but here she was, asking for help. It made her feel weak, and that was something she couldn't accept. Jason walked over and knelt beside her, his eyes searching hers. "Zara, you're not pretending. I can see you're struggling. But I'm here. I'll do whatever it takes to help you." She felt a rush of emotions that she wasn't ready to deal with. She had trained herself to shut down emotions long ago, but Jason was breaking through her defenses. There was a part of her that wanted to push him away, but another part, the part she didn't want to admit existed, was grateful for his presence. "I can't do this," Zara whispered, almost to herself. "I can't fix the device, and I can't go back to my people like this. I failed." Jason's face softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not over yet. We'll figure it out. You don't have to carry this alone." Solara lay on a massive golden throne, her once beautiful features now gaunt and pale. Her regal presence was still apparent, but it was marred by the weakness that had overtaken her. She looked at Nathan with a mixture of suspicion and hope, as if trying to understand whether he was truly the key to her salvation. Nathan took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had been chosen to save her life. No matter how impossible it seemed, he couldn't back down now. The air inside the Grand Phyrexian Palace was thick with an unfamiliar tension. Nathan's boots echoed against the polished floors as he followed Commander Vorax through the long, glittering corridors. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, and his chest tightened with every step he took. He had never imagined that he would be standing in the heart of an alien empire, let alone be tasked with saving a queen who had once ruled with unchallenged power. The palace around him was a marvel of alien architecture, unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Towering spires of metal and crystal pierced the sky, and the walls seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if the building itself were alive. The golden light that bathed the chambers flickered from strange sources, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the wind. Every corner of the palace exuded wealth and power, and yet there was something unsettling about it. The opulence felt hollow in the wake of the growing crisis. As they neared the Queen's private chambers, Nathan felt the weight of the situation settle even more heavily on his shoulders. The fate of an entire empire rested on his ability to save a woman he had only just met and whom he barely understood. He had come here hoping to be of help, but now he wasn't so sure. Could he really do this? Could a simple human like him, a scientist with no experience in matters of war or alien biology, really save someone as important as Queen Solara? Nathan glanced at Vorax, who was walking ahead of him with purpose. The commander had been nothing but professional so far, but Nathan could sense the tension radiating from him. The Phyrexian people were a proud race, and it was clear that Vorax's loyalty to the Queen ran deep. The thought of failing them weighed heavily on Nathan's mind, but he couldn't turn back now. "We are almost there," Vorax said without turning around. His voice was calm, but Nathan could hear the urgency beneath it. "The Queen needs you, Dr. Carter. Time is running out." Nathan swallowed hard. He could feel the heaviness of Vorax's words pressing down on him. The closer they got to Solara, the more he realized that he was stepping into the unknown, into a world where every decision could mean life or death. As they entered the Queen's chambers, Nathan was struck by the sheer size of the room. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting scenes of battle, conquest, and the glory of the Phyrexian Empire. At the center of the room, perched high on a throne made of polished obsidian, sat Solara. She was a sight to behold, tall, regal, and surrounded by an aura of authority that was almost palpable. But despite her commanding presence, Nathan could see the toll the illness had taken on her. Her once lustrous skin now seemed almost translucent, and her golden eyes, which should have gleamed with power, were dull and weary. Her breathing was shallow, and her hand rested limply on the arm of the throne, as if she no longer had the strength to hold herself upright. The Queen's eyes flickered over to Nathan as he entered the room. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Nathan felt a strange chill run down his spine. There was something hauntingly powerful about Solara, something that made her seem more like a force of nature than a mere mortal. But at the same time, he saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the desperation for a solution that was growing by the second. "You've come," she said, her voice weak but still commanding. "You are the one they sent to save me." Nathan felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected to be greeted so directly by the Queen. He had assumed that her condition would render her unable to speak, let alone engage in conversation. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw a woman who was fighting to stay alive, to hold on to the empire she had spent her life building. I'll do everything I can," Nathan stammered, his voice betraying the uncertainty he felt. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "But I don't know if I can help you. This illness, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. I don't know what's causing it, let alone how to cure it." Solara's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was clear she was in immense pain. "You are the one who will find the answer," she said, her voice full of quiet confidence. "The prophecy has foretold it. You must trust in yourself, Dr. Carter." Nathan's mind raced. The prophecy. He had heard about it from Commander Vorax, but hearing it spoken by the Queen herself made it feel all the more real. The Threxans had placed all their hope in him, a man who had never been a part of their world, a man who didn't understand their people or their culture. How could he possibly be the one to save their Queen? He was no hero, just a man with a shattered past and a broken spirit. Still, there was something in Solara's gaze that made him feel as though he had no choice but to try. The Queen was counting on him, and the weight of her trust was not something he could ignore. "I'll try," Nathan said, his voice steadying with newfound resolve. "I'll find a way to save you." Solara nodded, her golden eyes flickering with what might have been relief. "I knew you would, human. You are our last hope." As Vorax stepped forward to give Nathan the details of the Queen's condition, Nathan took a deep breath and approached the throne. The closer he got to Solara, the more he could sense the danger she was in. Her breathing was labored, and her skin had taken on a faint bluish hue. Every movement she made seemed to require an immense effort. Nathan knelt beside her, setting his medical kit on the ground beside him. He began to examine her, his fingers brushing lightly against her skin. It was cold, unyielding. His mind worked furiously, recalling every medical journal he had ever read, every bit of information he had studied in his career. But nothing he had learned seemed to apply to what he was facing now. "Have you tried anything?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Solara's eyes flickered to Vorax, who stepped forward. "We have tried every known treatment, every form of healing technology we possess. Nothing works. It is as if the disease is evolving with every attempt." Nathan's stomach churned. He had seen diseases before, but nothing like this. The complexity of it all was overwhelming. He had to act fast. There was no time to waste. If he didn't find a solution soon, the Queen would be lost, and with her death, the Threxan Empire would crumble. As he worked, Nathan couldn't help but feel the weight of his surroundings. The room was silent except for the sound of Solara's labored breathing. The tapestries on the walls seemed to watch him, as if the ancient history of the Threxans was judging his every move. The shadows that clung to the corners of the room felt alive, pressing in on him as he worked in the face of impending failure. But Nathan had no choice but to press forward. He had been chosen for this task, and now there was no turning back. The fate of the Queen, and of an entire empire, rested in his hands. Nathan's hands trembled as he worked quickly, the weight of the situation pressing down on him with each passing second. His mind raced, but his thoughts were clouded. The Queen's condition was deteriorating faster than he had anticipated. Every time he thought he had found a lead, it slipped away like sand through his fingers. His pulse quickened as he scanned the medical data again, hoping for something, anything, that could give him a clue. The strange alien disease that was attacking Solara's body seemed to resist every treatment he could think of. Commander Vorax stood by the door, his posture rigid, eyes darting nervously from the Queen to Nathan. His concern was visible, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say, really. They all knew how desperate the situation was. The Queen was the backbone of the Threxan Empire, and without her, the Empire would crumble. Without her, hope would die. Nathan glanced up briefly, meeting Vorax's eyes. The commander's usually confident face was tight with worry. It was clear that even he was beginning to doubt if they had made the right choice in bringing the human scientist here. He couldn't blame Vorax for thinking that. Nathan was just a man from Earth, a mere scientist with no experience in saving an alien queen from a mysterious illness. The weight of his task was suffocating, but there was no room for hesitation. If he didn't find a cure, Solara would die, and the Threxans would lose everything. Solara's weak voice interrupted his thoughts. "You are our only hope, human," she said softly. "I trust you." Her words hit Nathan like a jolt of electricity. There it was again, the pressure, the overwhelming expectation. But this time, instead of feeling crushed by it, he felt a surge of determination rise within him. He had come here to help, and he wasn't going to give up just because the task seemed impossible. He had to try. He owed it to her. He owed it to the people who believed in him. He worked feverishly, trying every possible method, but nothing seemed to slow the disease's progress. His hands shook with frustration. He could feel the sweat dripping down his brow as he scanned the various medical devices around him. Nothing was working. The Queen's breathing was shallow now, each inhale coming slower than the last. She was fighting, but how much longer could she last? Then, just as Nathan was about to lose hope, his eyes caught something unusual on one of the medical screens. A faint reading flickered on the display, hidden within the constant stream of data. His heart skipped a beat as he focused on it, his mind racing. Could this be it? Could he have finally found something? The reading was strange, unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't a normal biological marker. It seemed to be something foreign, an anomaly. His fingers flew across the screen as he accessed more data. The disease that had infected Solara was not only a biological agent, but it also seemed to be linked to some kind of energy signature. A form of radiation, perhaps. Whatever it was, it didn't fit any of the categories of illness he was familiar with. Nathan didn't waste a second. He pulled up the energy scans from the Queen's previous medical sessions. As he studied them, the connection became clearer. The disease wasn't just a biological attack. It was a deliberate assault on Solara's body, using energy to disrupt her internal systems. The question was, who would want to do this? And why? "Commander," Nathan said, his voice suddenly firm. "I think I've found something." Vorax stepped forward, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. "What is it, human?" "The disease. It's not just a virus or infection," Nathan explained, his fingers moving rapidly over the screen. "It's a kind of energy-based attack. There's an outside force manipulating the Queen's body from within. It's using a frequency that disrupts her cells and organ functions. But if I can isolate that frequency, we might be able to reverse it." Vorax's eyes widened with understanding, though doubt still clouded his face. "But how do we do that? You said this is something you've never seen before." "I know," Nathan admitted, wiping his brow. "But I have an idea. There's a device I can build, a resonance frequency emitter. If I can generate a reverse frequency that matches the one controlling the disease, it should neutralize the energy interference. We might have a chance at saving her." Vorax didn't hesitate. "Do it." Nathan's mind raced. He had no time to waste. He immediately began to assemble the necessary equipment, pulling together parts from the medical tools and devices in the room. His heart raced with both excitement and fear. This was it. This was the chance he had been waiting for, but it wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't sure the device would even work, and even if it did, there was no telling how much time Solara had left. As he worked, Vorax moved to stand guard by the door, his expression one of fierce determination. He didn't take his eyes off Nathan for a second. The room was thick with the tension of waiting, and the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Nathan's fingers flew over the equipment, his heart pounding in his chest. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, and the Queen's weakening breaths filled the silence, each one more labored than the last. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Nathan had the device assembled. It was a clunky thing, far from perfect, but it was the best he could do with the limited resources at hand. He connected it to a portable power source and turned it on. The machine hummed to life, its circuits buzzing softly. Nathan held his breath, praying that this would work. He approached the Queen's side and carefully placed the device near her body. Solara's eyes fluttered weakly open, and she fixed him with a look of cautious hope. Nathan met her gaze, his hand trembling slightly as he activated the emitter. The room seemed to hold its breath as the device began to emit a low-frequency hum, the air around them vibrating with energy. At first, nothing happened. For several long seconds, the room was silent except for the sound of the device's hum. But then, Nathan saw it. A faint ripple of light passed over Solara's skin, like a wave of energy spreading across her body. Her breathing, which had been shallow and uneven, began to steady. The flicker of life returned to her eyes. It was working. Nathan could hardly believe it. For the first time since he had arrived, he felt a glimmer of hope. The Queen wasn't out of danger yet, but the disease's hold on her was beginning to loosen. He kept the device running, watching as the energy readout stabilized. The Queen's vitals were slowly returning to normal. But then, just as hope began to bloom in Nathan's chest, the door to the room suddenly burst open. A figure entered, silhouetted by the harsh light from the hallway behind them. Nathan's heart stopped. The last thing he needed right now was an interruption. Vorax's face went pale when he saw the figure. "No," he muttered under his breath. Nathan turned to see who had entered, and his blood ran cold. It was an enemy, the last thing they needed right now. The door slammed shut with a resounding crash, echoing through the sterile medical chamber. Nathan's heart raced as he spun around, instinctively reaching for anything that could serve as a weapon, though his mind was still focused on the device now humming near Queen Solara's body. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for the possibility of a new enemy intruding just when things seemed to be turning around. The figure who entered was tall, cloaked in dark armor, his face hidden beneath a black helmet. He moved with an air of authority, his every step calculated and deliberate. He was not one of the Threxan soldiers Nathan had come to know. This man, or whatever he was something different, and the look on Vorax's face confirmed it. Vorax stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon holstered at his side. "You should not have come here, Call," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Call, the mysterious figure, tilted his head slightly, as if savoring the tension in the air. "I have come for what is mine," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't need to ask what Call meant. The weight of the situation was clear. Call was here to take the Queen. Solara, still lying on the medical bed, turned her head slightly, her eyes locking with Nathan's. He could see the faintest flicker of recognition in her gaze. But it wasn't fear, it was something more powerful. Determination. She had been through battles before. She wasn't going to let this stranger take her life without a fight. But what could they do? Nathan was a scientist, not a soldier. The Threxans, as skilled as they were in combat, weren't prepared for an attack like this. And now, with the Queen's life hanging in the balance, Nathan realized something. This wasn't just about saving the Queen anymore. It was about survival. For all of them. "I won't let you take her," Vorax growled, his voice filled with resolve. Call chuckled, the sound dark and sinister. "You think you have a choice, soldier." His voice was like ice, each word deliberately slow measured. "You have no idea what's at stake here, do you? The Queen's life, the fate of your entire empire. They are mine to decide." Nathan's pulse quickened. He didn't understand exactly what was happening, but he knew that Call was not someone to be trifled with. The air around them seemed to thrum with tension, and the room felt smaller, more confined, as though the walls themselves were closing in on them. Suddenly, Cal stepped forward, raising one hand. A strange energy crackled in the air, like static electricity, and Nathan felt a sudden, intense pressure in his chest. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't physical, yet it felt like an invisible weight pressing against him, squeezing the air from his lungs. "You've made a grave mistake," Call said, his voice almost a whisper now. "The cure you think you found for the Queen is nothing more than a temporary solution. In the end, you will all pay the price for defying me." Before anyone could react, Cal raised his hand higher, and a sudden pulse of energy shot from his palm. It slammed into the wall next to Nathan with a deafening crack, causing the entire room to shake. Nathan stumbled backward, his heart racing as he tried to regain his composure. He looked at Vorax, who was now on full